Well, everyone, it's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this time, we're doing another album analysis, and I got Jim and Alex back. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here, Shane.
Thank you. And this time, I got to pick the album. And of course, it had to be Rush. And if you're wondering how much I love Rush, I just want to quote Fanboys for a minute. It's like, you only have Rush tapes here. Don't you have any variety? Rush is variety. We got
the Shane Conto variety show is what we have today.
Which is nothing but Rush. So legitimately, a little backstory. I had a radio show in college on Riders 107.7 The Bronx, and it was called Spirit of the Radio, thanks to Rush. And at least once a semester, I would have a special episode where it was nothing but Rush. And I even dared to play all of 2112 in its entirety on one of my episodes. I front-loaded all of the ads that I had to read. It's just so that I could wrap up my last 20 minutes of my show with just the song 2112. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Rush, and we're talking about Moving Pictures, which is their most iconic album, which is it about movies? Or you can look at the front of the album and see people literally moving pictures around.
Right.
So, get it? So basically, Rush is like the most nerd rock band you could possibly think of, because they have songs about Lord of the Rings and Ayn Rand novels and all kinds of different stuff. But this particular album is their most successful of all time, which also spawned the song Tom Sawyer, which is their most popular song. But things weren't always so great for Rush, and it took them a few albums to really get their footing. And by 1980, they had 2112, a couple other albums, including Permanent Waves that came out before this. And this was their last album that was really, truly like a full rock, power trio album, because then they started going like super new wave in 80s throughout the rest of the 80s, to the point where you got up to like Time Stands Still, which is like the most not rock Rush song you could possibly think of. If you haven't listened to that song, look up the music video. It is weird as hell. But I, at one point, owned all 20 Rush albums on CD, listened to them all regularly, including their final album, which was Clockwork Angels, which was a steampunk science fiction concept album, which was their like true return to like hard rocking progressive rock music. And I will be forever sad that I never got to see them in concert, and I only hold my brother partially to blame for saying, let's wait, we could get them cheaper on Ticketmaster. And then they turned out to be $150 a ticket, and no, I could not afford that at that moment. And now Neil Peart has passed away, and I doubt that Rush will ever play again. So thanks, Ethan, if you're listening.
Man.
I don't really blame him, but I do really wish that I got to see Rush. But I have seen about 8 of their concerts on DVD, and have watched, like, I know specifically I have, as I pull this out here, so I have VH1 Classics, classic albums, which breaks down 2112 and Moving Pictures. So I love Rush, if you couldn't tell. And this album has 7 tracks on it, and 4 of them are like iconic gems of Rush's discography and their music, from Tom Sawyer to Red Barchetta to YYZ and Limelight. And yes, I said Z because they're Canadian. So
interesting.
I'm going to stop rambling here because I could just keep going. I did once write a 20 I almost wrote a 30-page paper on Rush for an honors contract for a class in college because I love them. But Alex, what did you think? What were some of your general thoughts on the album?
Well, when I first I listened to it for the first time all the way through today, and I tried to read some of the lyrics with it, not really knowing exactly what the lyrics meant, and I actually enjoyed some of the other songs when I didn't look at the lyrics. I was playing a video game, under quarantine right now. So I was playing a video game, and then I was just kind of listening to, I actually enjoyed the music more when I wasn't thinking about the lyrics, which makes sense. But I think the lyrics, especially for Limelight, actually made me appreciate that song more than normally. And I did look up what it was about. I didn't realize that Neil, which, by the way, a drummer that works at the music school I work at, you can back her up on this or argue. Is it Neil Peart or Neil Peart? She says it's really supposed to be pronounced Peart, and no one else pronounces it that way.
This might be like a Tolkien thing where like in Canada they say it this way, and
could be. Yeah.
I feel like if you actually, it's spelled Peart. So if it was Pert, it would be Peart.
Right.
So it was like Peart. Or like Peart. So I'm also not Canadian, so I don't have a Canadian accent and don't know exactly how because obviously I've listened to his interviews and stuff like that. So he said his own name before. And usually that's where you go with it. But
sure.
I don't think it's Neil Peart.
Right.
I think that's just I know I used to say that, and I definitely blame my South Jersey lazy tongue on that. Because any extra effort to add any other vowel sounds or syllables is negated in South Jersey, just for pure laziness.
Sure.
But
yeah,
that is a debate older than time.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave that to the language people. But I didn't realize that he wrote a lot of the lyrics for the band. I had no idea until today.
Yep.
And that he wrote the lyrics for that song. And I don't know. I always get into lyrics. I think that's just what brings me into things emotionally, but I just love, I know it's the chorus, but I just love the line about, for those who wish to be must put aside the alienation. I get on with the fascination, the real relation, the underlying theme. I really feel like he's pushing away a lot of bullshit, with that line and trying to get to something really authentic about, from what I'm reading about, what it really means to be an artist, just focusing on his craft and not dealing with the bullshit of fame. I was reading, he never wanted to be famous.
No.
And he hated being famous in the beginning. So to kind of see him write an entire song about that, and that really is one of their biggest songs. I think it's probably top 3, right? I mean, so that's why I bring that one up. That lyric just really stood out to me. I mean, I kind of read it differently, when I was listening to it. Those who wish to be must, push aside the alienation. I was thinking about isolation. I was thinking about, the other image that people thrust onto you and that sort of thing. That's always relatable. But I just really appreciated that song more than I ever did. I like, for some reason, Tom Sawyer always is kind of a dud for me. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I'm, it's a great song, like the structure of it, but it's just not my jam. And then I was starting to get into some of the deep cuts a little bit more. I think, what was it called? Fish Eye. Vital Signs. I really liked Vital Signs. That one is killer. That one's really good. And then I think I liked, was it called Witch Hunt?
Yeah.
And let me ask you, it said part 3 of Fear. Was that a continuation of another song, 2 other songs on a different album?
I don't think so.
Okay, on Apple Music, in parentheses, it says Witch Hunt, and then it says Part 3 of Fear.
It's interesting because, like, I feel like a lot of prog rock bands do a lot of weird stuff, and that just seems like a weird thing to do.
I know that prog rock bands like to kind of do like continue themes, because I used to listen to Dream Theater and they did that all the time.
What was really interesting,
not just a random.
So their album, which one was it? It's not. I think it's Farewell to Arms. Of not Farewell to Arms, Farewell to King ends with Cygnus X1, which is like about going up into space and finding this wormhole. And their next album, Hemispheres, builds off of that and has an 18-minute concept album about this man who's been teleported into the land of gods. And it's just like, that's the kind of stuff that Rush does. Right. And especially because, like, this album was such an important transition because this was the end of that stuff.
Oh, okay.
They stopped doing humongous concepts, songs that were like 20 minutes long, because they, like, Hemispheres was too much for them. Because they did like a 18-minute song, Cygnus X1 Part 2 Hemispheres. Wow. And then they have La Villa Strangiato, which is like a 10-minute instrumental, which has so many different time changes and stuff in it that they're like, we couldn't even do this and record it in a row. Like, it was just impossible. Sure. And almost impossible to play in concert. So, like, they're just like, well, we pushed ourselves too much. And so, like, their idea was trying to do more condensed story songs, and that's where Red Barchetta comes from, which is why that's like a 6 minute and tells a whole entire post-apocalyptic story. And I'll get to that in a minute because, like, I'm a huge fan of that song. But Jim, what are some of your thoughts of the album?
So I'd never listened to the full album before, all the way through, like Alex. So this is my first time listening to it as intended, I guess. Part of me always gets frustrated with songs that have been so overplayed on the radio that I've heard so many times before that I can never hear them for the first time. Tom Sawyer being front and center there, Limelight being another, of which, like, those are two Rush songs that if they came on the radio, I'd leave them on when I was younger. And at this point in my life, I don't even listen to them anymore. So it was kind of good to like sit down and actually listen to it. And like Alex, I kind of delved into the lyrics a little bit. So first impressions, some of the themes that I got were, well, it became apparent these guys are readers, obviously, like the references to Tom Sawyer 100%. And I noticed at least like 3 references to kind of classic literature. And then the other thing, obviously this is, like you said, this is the Rush masterpiece, if you will, right? Kind of end of an era for them, end of a sound for them. But you can clearly hear all 3 of these guys putting their stamp on the record. Neil Peart, if you will, maybe even bigger than Geddy Lee. Like, even though he's the voice of the band, I didn't know until today that he wrote the lyrics to Tom Sawyer, or at least most of the lyrics to Tom Sawyer. So I don't know if you guys want to do a deep dive into that, but I'm themes. As far as themes go, I was a little bit unclear on where they were being genuine and where they were being ironic, because there seems to be, to me, a very sardonic, like, ironic tone. Witch Hunt being one example, singing about the vigilantes, the people who say we're on the side of right and those people are wrong. And the sense of irony in that song was like really, really strong. But then on the flip side of that, on a song like Limelight, guitar solo still gets me, though, to this day. The guitar solo has not gotten old, which is a pretty big statement for a song I've heard hundreds of times probably at this point. That one seemed like genuine advice from a rock star to somebody who wants to be in the limelight. So I'm a little bit unsure about the overall tone of the record, but yeah, I couldn't pick out a favorite deep cut for you. I was trying to kind of figure out how Rush got to moving pictures, because by the time they're doing moving pictures, nobody sounds like Rush, and Rush doesn't sound like anybody else. Like on their first album, self-titled, I think.
Yep.
Shane, correct me if it's not. They sound like Led Zeppelin, which is awesome. I love Led Zeppelin.
Oh wow!
But they don't sound like Rush, the Rush that we know.
No.
You know what I mean?
And to give a little bit of history lesson, because their original drummer, John Rutsey, was a huge Zeppelin fan. And he was the drummer on the first album. And Working Man. So this is a lot of stuff that I got from the documentary Beyond the Lighted Stage. Mm-hmm. Love it. My favorite documentary ever, personally. And they played Working Man on the radio in like Ohio, in like Cleveland, and they're like, when's the new Zeppelin album coming out? And like, they're not quite like Greta Van Fleet that sounds literally like Led Zeppelin, but like it's close enough. And it had a very different vibe, because here's the dynamic. Geddy Lee and Alex were like primary school friends. They knew each other since they were kids, and they were a couple of goofballs. So like, they don't take things seriously. They're silly. Like Geddy Lee's the iconic one. People notice him all the time. And it's funny because there's a whole part in the documentary where they're in a restaurant. They don't even recognize who Alex Lifeson is. And they're just like, can we get your autograph to Geddy Lee? And Alex is just sitting there eating his sandwich because we're not even bothering him. But the thing is, it's like, Geddy's like the iconic one, but the thing is, all their lyrics, starting with Fly By Night, their second album, was written by Neil Peart. Wow. And he's the one who is intellectual, was a reader. They did a tour with Kiss early on in their career, and Gene Simmons is just like, are they aliens? Like, who are they? Do they party? Do they not like women? What's going on here? And apparently they would sit by themselves drinking Southern Comfort and smoking weed in their rooms, and Neil Peart was just sitting there reading.
That seems like such an odd match to me. It was one of the members of Kiss. I remember a quote from like rock radio back in the day when I was younger. He said he only picked up a guitar to get laid, and to me that's like a cardinal sin as a musician. Was that Paul
Stanley?
I don't remember which one of them it was, but like Rush gets so much respect from I earned respect from, you know, different crowds, whether you be nerds or, you know, balls to the wall rockers, because they're excellent at what they do, you know.
Well, they influenced Pantera, Metallica, Anthrax, Skid Row, Tenacious D, Smashing Pumpkins, and like Billy Corgan said he connected with his parents playing them Entre Nous, because like he felt like that spoke for him. And that's from, I think, Permanent Waves, which was the album before this. Okay. And what's really interesting about Rush is they have 20 albums, and you can distinctly cut them into 5 different eras of Rush. Mm-hmm. And at the end of each of these 5 eras is the big blow off, and it's the best album out of all of them. Mm. And this was the end of their second era of Rush, because it was 2112 was that 4th album that was like, bam, this is us. This is who Rush really is, because Caress of Steel almost torpedoed their career.
Yeah, it's a pretty
and that's a weird album. And it's not a great album.
I didn't like it.
No. And like, that's legitimately, like, I listened to it, but I'm just like, I don't love this. This definitely isn't strong. But like 2112 was, and they're like, we need shorter songs, we need singles, and they're like, or we can do a whole concept album that takes up a whole side of a record. And that's what they did, and they killed it. And then they built up, they kept refining themselves, and that's what progressive rock music's about. And this is when, like, I remember a bunch of the people in the documentary, like, after moving pictures, they went too far because they really got into new wave. They got away from the guitar. They used the synthesizer a lot because Tom Sawyer was one of the first ones where it's just like the and then, of course, the drum solo of all Neil Peart drum solos comes out of nowhere in Tom Sawyer. But like, that's the thing. Tom Sawyer's so played at this point. Like, everybody knows Tom Sawyer.
I'm Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer, slap of the bass.
That's it.
Can we dive into that song a little bit? I still can't decide. But okay, so my take on this is it has to do with like the Mississippi River. There's a line in there about connecting the mythic to the something, connecting like the story to a myth.
The myth, the mist.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's this very intellectual idea about the Mississippi River being kind of, you know, existing on a couple of different planes. And Huck Finn is usually the book that the intellectuals will look at as being like Mark Twain's Mississippi River novel. So I think it's interesting that Tom Sawyer is the one they picked, or Neil Peart chose to write about. And I can't decide if being that modern day Tom Sawyer is a good thing or not a good thing, because to me the lyrics go kind of both ways.
Right. Yeah. Are you like fighting the waves and like fighting the battle of trying to be like, because it's not just an intellectual thing, it's like a moral. You're supposed to have a moral center too, right? Isn't that what part of those Mark Twain novels are? Mm-hmm. So are you trying to be a good person in an adolescent world, like
yes, but he gets high on you, right? There's that lyric about he gets high on you, like he makes you do it instead of having to do it himself. Like, is that good because he's clever and smart, or is that him taking advantage of people and not being a moral adult? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe you guys don't have any answers at this moment.
Yeah, what do you
these are the things that I come like 1980. It's like it's a dawn of a new era.
Oh yeah. Oh, very much so. Well, maybe there's a duality there. I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be more of a question mark than a statement. You know, I don't know if there's, you know, I looked up that song too. There wasn't as much information on that, you know, just a little bit about Mark Twain, and that's it. You know, there wasn't
the bit that I saw on, sorry, Alex, did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
The bit that I saw, I think it was Genius. I looked up the song on Genius, and the little bit that I saw claimed that Neil Peart was trying to say something about him as like the boy himself, the boy, and himself, the man. So maybe the duality that you mentioned is kind of there, because Tom Sawyer is a boy as the protagonist of that book, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So like, what kind of a man does he grow up into in 1980? Maybe is like what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I found that way more interesting than the music. Usually I'm a music first guy. The lyrics don't really matter to me, but having heard that song so many times, I had no other avenue in with the lyrics.
Same here. Yeah. Plus, I think with Rush, and I when this isn't as much of a criticism as much as just an element of a lot of prog bands. Mm-hmm. And my good buddy, who I've played music with over the years, who introduced me to prog music through Dream Theater, said the same thing recently, because his music taste changed entirely. He went into hip hop and dubstep and all that stuff like 12 years ago. Changed completely. Used to be in the metal and prog rock and everything. He says that it lacks soul. I can see what he means, and so I feel with stuff that lacks soul, that's not gonna give you that. Oh, Neil Young, Tom Petty, Billy Joel, whatever it is you can come up with, what I mean?
Like nerd music. Here's the thing: their two biggest criticisms is their music's too white and it's too intellectual.
The word that I thought of was cerebral, and then that's why I felt the need to look at the lyrics more so, because with Audio Slave, it seemed it was a lot more obvious for the most part what he was going through. Even when like just reading the lyrics made it more like, oh wow, but with Rush, I feel like there's a lot more going on. I kind of want to know what they're talking about.
And I think the thing is, it's like all three of them were incredible musicians. Like they play the hell out of their instruments and they do some amazing things. And they're very concerned with that. And then Neil Peart has a lot to say. He read a lot. He had a lot of ideas. He dove into a lot of different philosophies. And like at one point, somebody labeled them a bunch of fascists because of 2112 is based off of The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And like both Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee's parents were Holocaust survivors. Yeah. And just like, come on, man. And it's like, because 2112 does have some basis in individualism. Yes. Because it's like this music, I need to play this music. And like in The Fountainhead, it's have trouble with that word. Architecture. And because like in that world, you had to do exactly as they tell you. Yeah. There's a standardization. And basically they took it to music instead. Like the Temple of Syrinx is this religious cult that controls all of intellectual property and creativity. And you can't make music that we don't approve of. And that's the whole story, and them like breaking free. And honestly, I think it's funny because even in like the interviews that I've seen, even like Alex and Geddy are like, Neil went to places with some of his lyrics, and like like they love playing their music and stuff, and like sometimes it was just like this is what Peart wanted to talk about in his music and his lyrics and stuff like that. And even Geddy Lee's like, sometimes I could barely sing those lyrics. They're so complicated. And that's a thing. And it's dense. And I think Tom Sawyer is one of those songs like you could easily just not think about the lyrics, because if you don't, they don't make a whole lot of sense.
It's not really fair to put the politics of Ayn Rand onto a band that just used the novel as inspiration. Like nobody's taking criticisms of Mark Twain and applying them to Tom Sawyer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And because like there's 7 songs on this album, like obviously it comes right out blaring with Tom Sawyer, which is like the most iconic. I love Red Barchetta.
What is that song? I was surprised to hear you said it's post-apocalyptic. I didn't get that at all.
So
I got a little bit of that. I was getting like a dystopic kind of
so the idea is this place is overrun by giant like government ruled alloy air cars that control the populace. And he goes out to the country to see his uncle, and he finds a red Ferrari, a red Barchetta, which is outlawed.
Is that the time machine that they reference? Is that the time machine reference is the car, or is the time machine a different thing altogether? I thought there was a lyric about a time machine. I could be wrong, because this is maybe I think I can count on one hand.
I think I know the lyrics that you're thinking of, and I don't think it said time machine. But like, the idea is he finds this Ferrari and it's just like, ooh, and like he floors it and he goes out, and that's when that like awesome like guitar riff kicks in. It's like, woo! And Alex Lifeson is just like killing it. But the thing is, he runs into these giant air cars, and they start shooting towards him and chasing him. And it's like this intense chase. And I love that because it's like I start driving through the valley and another one joins the chase. He gets through a bridge 1 lane wide. And it's very important that they mention that these alloy air cars were 2 lanes wide. So like he escapes on this tiny bridge and then goes back to his uncle, and is there by the fire with him. It's just like this whole crazy post-apocalyptic dystopia story told in like 6 minutes. And
yeah, I got kind of shades of 1984, where like the protagonist kind of escapes into there's like a green space that he goes to kind of escape from that's kind of where my head was too.
So like, if this were like 5 years earlier, they would have made like a whole entire 20-minute song about this whole entire dystopia, but they're like, let's condense this into a more packageable thing. And like, it's a really awesome driving song because there's like some killer riffs and stuff like that in it. And it just feels like you're just driving with him. And I think that's why the song's so cool. And then it inspired me and it started giving me script ideas. It's like, I will adapt this.
There you go.
They weren't approached for a lot of soundtrack work back in the late 70s, early 80s, were they? I feel like a lot of their stuff is very cinematic, but I can't think of any movies that I saw.
Well, here's the thing. They are known as the biggest cult band in history. Because like they were always on the fringe because Rolling Stone hated them. Like they destroyed them all the time. I think one of their reviews said that Geddy Lee sounded like a cat with its balls in a vice. And
funny, it's objectively, it's kind of funny.
It is funny. Like, but the thing is, like, Geddy's voice had evolved over time, and like you could tell, like at the beginning, it was like those shrieking, those first couple albums, and by this album, it matured, and like especially listening to their later concerts, like he couldn't do that stuff anymore. So like he evolved the songs, and I think some of them sounded better, honestly, without like the shrieking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not for nothing, Rolling Stone also destroyed Led Zeppelin in the beginning. Wow. And that they walked that back since then. So.
But that's the thing. Rush, I remember doing a persuasive speech in college about why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not a good representation of rock and roll. And still at that point, Rush had not been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I was so mad. And I made that a very specific point in my speech about it, along with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, which were still not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Really?
ABBA is, Donna Summers.
Very surprising.
Dolly
very surprising.
Offered it, but not Judas Priest and Iron Maiden.
A lot of it has to do with money, but and there's politics there too.
And like metal, they don't appreciate very much. There's literally like 2 metal bands in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's Black Sabbath and Metallica.
But I think the most metal thing about Rush on this album, let's say, are maybe just the lyrical stylings in some of the songs. There's not much metal. There's not much metal.
Progressive rock either. But the thing is, like, it's interesting because along with touring with Kiss, they toured with Uriah Heep early on, which I'm a huge fan of Uriah Heep. They're another progressive rock band from like the 60s and 70s. Wow. And they also toured with Ted Nugent when they were both at Rock Bottom. So that's interesting. Imagine that concert. They said they were paying to like 20 people in Battle Creek, Michigan, with Ted Nugent after Caress's steel bombed. But
I want to go to that show. That actually sounds like a lot of fun.
I definitely would have went to that show.
Oh my God.
And then if I'm not mistaken, YYZ's the next song on this, which literally is the Morse code for the SOS at Toronto International Airport. So
that's right.
Is that Morse code. The
Really? Oh, I didn't realize. That's crazy.
And it was written as like coming home back to Canada. And so like that's them just showing off.
That's awesome.
Was YYZ the one where they just dropped the last beat of the measure and it like slides right into the next one? Or am I thinking of Red Barchetta?
YYZ is the instrumental one.
Yeah, it's literally them just like going ham.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
listening to it on the way up to on the ski lift. I had to ride the chair up to work, and it was just kind of like it, like you said, very cerebral. Like just the time signatures, as cool as it is, you got to stop and like try to wrap your head around it. You know,
What I find so interesting is because how many bands can you think of where you could distinctly hear the bass in most of the music? You could always hear the bass in Rush.
Right.
And like, especially like, and each of them, the three of them, each got their chance to like really show off.
Tool keeps jumping into my mind today. And maybe for that reason, because of the progressive nature and the heavy bass. But no, it's not like nobody sounds like this, even today. Like nobody sounds like Rush.
It's true. And he is an amazing bass player, Geddy Lee. I think it's easy to forget how good he is. And YYZ, I got to give a shout out to School of Rock, Marlboro, the kids I in the metal group that I instruct. I basically just stay out of their way for the most part. They're awesome. They're amazing musicians. And the one, she's like 17 years old. She's getting it. Like she's doing, it's amazing what they're doing. It's incredible. But they're going to perform that song probably tomorrow, if not tomorrow, next Sunday. And it's badass. And it was messy in the beginning, naturally, right? That's a tough song. And they've just gotten better and better at it over the last like 2.5-3 months. So yeah.
Yeah, it's something really impressive where it's just like, because Rush always tries to incorporate instrumentals, because I think it's just a matter of like they love their musicianship so much that they want to like have that outlet that just kind of just like forget about the lyrics for a minute. Because here's the thing, Geddy Lee plays the keyboards, the bass, and sings all at the same time.
Yeah, that's a lot. And what I will say this about instrumentals, because I grew up, listening to Dream Theater. They were like my prog band, more on the prog metal side.
Yeah.
And when I listen to YYZ more than any other song, I feel like I'm listening to the birth of Dream Theater. I swear to God, I know they were influenced by them, and like all the different changes. And there is something about an instrumental, I think, for a band like this that kind of frees you up from not having to do a pop structure. You don't have to have a chorus now. You don't even have to tell a narrative. You're telling a story emotionally with the guitar, the keyboards, the bass, and the drums. And so, and packaging it all together in an instrumental. I've heard Metallica do it somewhat well, and I've heard Dream Theater do it really well. And this is really good. This is
yeah. And you don't have to take, like you said, you don't have to like let the lyrics take center stage and kind of back off. Everybody's kind of allowed to play their instrument. Express themselves kind of melodically, but even different from like a Zeppelin instrumental, which will have a guitar riff maybe take the place of the vocals. These guys are all playing their instrument. You could listen to any one of them and be like, oh my goodness, wow, there's a lot being said right here.
It'd be a lot of fun. And I'm sure, because I don't know how guys do this. I know like Rick Beato does it. I know you follow Beato. Shane, you should follow Rick Beato if you don't already. He runs a pretty successful YouTube channel where he somehow or another he's got access to the tracks, and he separates them out so he can listen to the bass by itself and the guitar by itself and the drums by itself. It would be a lot of fun to do that with YYZ or YYZ. That'd be fun.
I didn't realize they said Z in Canada. They say Z in Canada?
Yep.
Yeah, it's weird for me to say that.
I'm so used to it because I think I just started doing that ever since I started watching their documentaries and stuff, because they all refer to it that way because they're Canadian. And also I think ever since I saw the movie Lost City of Z or Lost City of Z, I just started referring to it that way. Like, obviously, when I say not Canadian or English things, I do just say Z. Now, I know we talked a little bit about Limelife already, but like Alex Lifeson really gets to shine in that like that's like a haunting guitar solo that he does in Limelight. And I know specifically on this VH1 classic albums show, he really talked about that. That was like a big time for him to shine on this album. And it's like all the other instruments kind of fade out, and he's just like, it's a very lonely sounding guitar solo. And it's point, because I think one of the most poignant lyrics for me is where he talks about, it's like, I can't treat you like a long-awaited friend. Like, you're just a stranger. Like, you think you know me so well because you love my work and stuff like that, but like, I don't know you. And I think some interesting context to this is, at the end of their concerts, especially in their later part of their career, Neil Peart would run from his drum set out the back onto his motorcycle and leave. And Geddy and Alex would still be on the stage.
That's kind of awesome. I love that.
And after his wife and daughter passed away, that's what he did. He went on like a multiple year journey on his motorcycle around North America, and Rush was on a hiatus for years. And that's what he did when they came back, was he would run off the stage when they were done, hop on his motorcycle and be gone, and avoid all the fans and stuff like that, because like he didn't have the capacity for that. And
I didn't know that he'd lost his wife and daughter. At what point in the career did that happen?
I believe it was post Test for Echoes, which was in 95, 96. So it was the late 90s into the early 2000s, and they never thought they were going to play again. And then they came back
to like, is it Vapor Waves?
Vapor Trails.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. They came back with Vapor Trails.
And Clockwork Angels were the last three like big studio albums. But it was Vapor Trails where they came back. Love the song Earthshine from that. Love that song a lot.
Yeah, that's not bad. It, from what I remember, it's much more straight ahead though, right? It's far removed from the progressive stuff.
Well, it's a lot heavier. Once Test for Echoes, Vapor Trails, Snakes and Arrows, and Clockwork Angels was like almost progressive metal at times, because like they got heavy towards the end of their career, and they brought that back from like their very beginnings. And like songs like Far Cry and BU2B and Headlong Flight, like they got heavy and with a lot of those songs, and which I love that era of Rush a lot. But you know, Limelight was a very, very personal song for Neil Peart, and what was so interesting is like this is the album that gave him the most fame. So it was like, well,
how ironic.
There you go. And that's the front half of the album, like the actual vinyl, are these 4 songs.
Right. Yeah.
And then you flip it, and that's where like the hidden gems of Camera Eye, Witch Hunt, and Vital Signs are. Right. And like out of the 3 of them, Witch Hunt's my favorite because there's something dark and ominous and creepy about that song. And I'm just like, ooh. I like, because the thing is, like, I knew all 4 of the front songs before I listened to the album for the first time. But like, I didn't know those 3 other songs until I actually got the CD. And I'm like, this is pretty dark and creepy. I like this.
I think those 3 songs today was my first time hearing all of them. And today I was up on the Alpine slide for work. And I put the second half of the album on. I listened to the first half of coincidentally at lunch, and then I came back to work and I put on the second half of the album, and somebody complimented me on my choice. They were like, oh, very, very nice atmosphere for the slide. I was like, I don't know what to tell you.
Were they being sarcastic?
No, they were being very, very genuine.
Oh, nice.
Which, Camera, I'd have to go back to Camera Eye again. That, of those songs, Camera Eye is the one that I have least to say about. But again, I usually listen to something twice before I give an opinion on it. So that's the one I'd go back to, I think, first to give a second listen.
Totally. Yeah.
And like I get like the and like you hear like the cameras clicking and like it has a very metropolitan kind of vibe to it. It kind of I'm sitting here, it's funny because I have Power Windows framed in my office because my brother bought me that one of the Rush albums. That's one of their albums from like the mid 80s, and that kind of dictated that sound on that album because that whole album sounds very like something out of like a metropolis and something much more like urban kind of sounding. And like Witch Hunt, I feel like the words like do 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 and with like the keyboards and like the synthesizers and stuff kind of started being like, okay. And this was definitely a shift with Rush, was because this is when Geddy was like, I want to experiment with the keyboards and the synthesizers. And, you know, it was the 80s, it was new wave. And they got to a breaking point with Hold Your Fire, which was like the last of their super 80s albums, because Alex Lifeson's like, we've lost it. Like, where's the guitar anymore in this band? And it actually lost a lot of their fans. I remember some of the metal band members talking about like starting with Subdivisions. It's like, I don't like this anymore. Like, this is not the power trio that I love. And that's the thing about Rush, is they kept evolving. And like, I'll admit, I enjoy all the different kinds of Rush. There is legitimate variety to it because they did keep changing drastically. Like, you could always tell on some level it's Rush, but like, it was always very different Rush. And I feel like there's hints on moving pictures of like what's to come, but like, I do feel like this is like the definitive Rush album.
Sure.
I think the synths, they lose me a bit. And most like rock bands, the synths are where they lose me. And to me, it's like it is a lack of soul or heart or whatever emotion I feel when I'm listening to Lifeson play on Limelight. The keys like often make me feel nothing, which is not, it's not me saying, you know, I'm not trying to take credit away from Geddy Lee for that. But I think that's what a lot of people are talking about when they say that like it's too much up here, you know, like the music of Rush is too much up here. I think a lot of that has to do with that kind of a relationship to the music, like as a listener, you know what I mean?
I think the synth is interesting because, you know, the cut from this album that I like, the deep cut I like the most, Vital Signs, I love the way they use the synth, but it's at the very beginning of the song, and then the bass kind of comes in and takes over and like thickens whatever it's like and I love that. It's like John Carpenter and Rush had a baby, you know, like it's like Kid from New York, like type of deal. Like, I thought that was really clever the way they used it there. And I think, you know, having been a Dream Theater fan, they always had synth, like there'd be a guitar solo.
Eric Sheranian.
Yeah. Is that his name? There was another one in there.
The reason I know Derek Sheranian is because he wound up leaving and creating Black Country Communion with Jason
Zach Wild.
Bonham,
no? Oh, Jason Bonham.
Glenn Hughes, and Joe Bonamassa.
Oh, okay.
Which, huge fan of that band.
I see. I was more familiar with Jordan Rudess, I think was his name, or Jordan Rudess. But it was always those keyboard solos were always like, wow, that's impressive. Okay, can we get back to the chorus?
Let's bring that guitar back again.
Or bring get another breakdown going on here or something, you know, like. So I feel you, Jim, on that. I do wonder if you take that keyboard, like the main stuff from the keyboard out of Limelight, I think you lose a little bit of the personality in the song. You know, it seems kind of important to the personality of that one. You know, I guess when it starts getting like trippy, you know, maybe that's not as necessary, you know, but it's just like, sprinkles on top. But yeah, synth definitely has a thinness to it that a grand piano, you know, all that soul and all that vibration and all that reverb, like just naturally coming out, like just will never be able to. It's just a completely different planet, sonically.
I feel like moving pictures is their best balance of using the synths and the keyboards where it's the most effective, because then they started really leaning into it. I'm a huge fan of Grace Under Pressure, which is 2 albums after this, that is very new wave. But like, I'm also a fan of like synthesizers and keyboards and stuff like that. But which is interesting because I brought up Uriah Heep earlier. They used organs in their music, like super prog rock, and they like the song. There's a live version of their song "Easy Living." Easy Living, that's just like going nuts on an organ, and I'm just like, oh my god. And like, you could tell like a lot of these progressive rock bands that they kind of were influenced by. Sure. And like, I'm also a huge fan of organs, but I also feel like organ has a lot more emotion to it.
When you say organ, you mean electric organ, or you mean like like a real deal pipe organ?
Yeah, like a pipe organ or a Hammond organ. What are we talking about here? Although a Hammond organ, I think, does carry a lot of soul.
Totally.
To be fair.
Totally. Yeah.
It's probably not like your old school, like organ out of like a Catholic church kind of organ.
Sure.
But like still, and not quite like an organ that you find at a baseball stadium.
Yeah. But I will forever defend an artist's right to like stop doing what they were doing that people loved and try something new, because like, you can only go so far with the power trio thing with bass and drums and guitar. So like, I'm totally conceptually behind it, but aesthetically it just doesn't, it just doesn't hit me here.
Well, and it's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just gonna say basically the same thing. It's kind of like the saxophone. Like you gotta use that saxophone sparingly, because if you get too carried away, you don't notice, Clarence Clemens, God rest his soul, from Bruce Springsteen, he wouldn't be on the whole song. He would have his moment, and then it would be beautiful, and then he'd be out. And
Pink Floyd would do that too. And like Pink Floyd, obviously, like experiment with a lot of different things. And like they would experiment with like saxophone and like brass and stuff like that. Crap, what the hell was I gonna say? I had a thought that I was going to bring up. It's interesting because like I'm a huge fan of Rush, and the other trio that I'm a huge fan of is like ZZ Top, which unfortunately they also had somebody who passed away recently with Dusty Hill. But like they had to shake things up too, because like how much of a career could you make of just playing the same like bluesy trio music? And like in the 80s, they got really 80s too. Right. And like there was points where it's just like, this is ZZ Top. Or like some people are like,
sure,
you listen to the earlier ZZ Top, like they did blues, because like all they remember is like Sharp Dressed Man and Give Me All Your Lovin' and stuff like that. But the thing is, it's like, if you keep doing the same thing, you wind up like AC/DC.
Right.
Which I love AC/DC. But I've even reached the point of no return where it's just like, no, stop releasing albums, please.
Yeah.
Even Cream's like the quintessential power rock trio, right? But they had to go
like 3 years.
They only lasted a few years, and even in that time, they were going very psychedelic, because who wants to hear a whole album of just blues rock, standards? And as an artist, I think conceptually, like you have to keep pushing yourself. You have to look for something new to inspire you, right?
Yeah, I think every band or artist is going to find a different way of, relating to the music and finding a way to express yourself. If you have to release an album every year, every 2 years, the well's going to run dry a little bit. some of my favorite artists, like, when I think about the Peppers, I know some people don't like love everything that they do, but they only do an album like once every 4 to 5 years. And so, there's a lot of years where like content's not being released. So, and when they finally get back to it, there's even uncertainty about whether or not they're going to do it, so but then you have, obviously, I know a lot about Tom Petty these days. I mean, they didn't change a tremendous amount. I don't think they had keys and synth and stuff like that. They kind of like kept going back and forth with things, but guitar, bass, drums was kind of the thing, and finding different guitars. And I mean, they had like a shitload of guitars that they would use through different types of amplifiers to get different types of sounds. So you can always find a way. I think you have to be incredibly driven. And but I don't know. I think if you have to release an album every couple of years because the record company tells you to, or you need to make more money or whatever it is, the well is going to run dry. For a trio, I'm sure it's very hard. I mean, I can't help but think of like Green Day, for example. I heard their last album, and there was definitely some synth and some like synth pop stuff thrown in there, and ooh, it didn't work for me. I listened to about half of it and I was like, ooh, this doesn't work. This is not Green Day. Like, but you listen to the stuff they released 15 years ago or 17 years ago. It's like, wow, they were really hitting their stride, in some ways. So I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's different. But you can't just release, even like Paul McCartney is a great example. Like, I don't know, when's the last time he did something that was like really great? Like I listened to his last album and I was like, it was fun. It was good. I respected it. I respected what he was trying to say, but it was just
was Mandolin Songs the last one he did, or it was like, no, I'm thinking of Vedder with the ukulele songs. Yeah. But what was the most recent Paul McCartney offering? I don't think I listened to it at all.
Had a couple of dice on it. I can't remember what it was called, and it was there were some interesting songs. Don't get me wrong, but it definitely felt like, I mean, come on, the guy's 78 years old. I mean, or now he's going to be 80 years old soon. The well's going to run dry, for everybody eventually. I do believe that every artist kind of hits their stride, and it's so much fun when that happens. It sounds like this is a good example of that, this album. But I don't know, how long does that trail of like golden art last, but you can't count certain artists out. Sometimes they can come back and do something special, many years later. It's just very hard to do.
I am going to quote and slightly paraphrase Jack Black from Rush Beyond the Lighted Stage. They just have this jar of awesome sauce, and they've been shaking it for years. And the sauce keeps coming out. And I love Jack Black so much. And the thing is, it's like, Rush was able to keep reinventing themselves. And I think that's why, because like they only lasted 4 albums doing the same thing, and then shook things up and redid it. And they had 20 albums. One of their last 4 albums was legitimately just a bunch of covers of 60s songs, which is really interesting.
Was that the one with Summertime Blues?
Yep.
Okay.
And The Seeker and stuff like that. And like, I thought it was fine. Like, it was an interesting little diversion. But like, that was plopped into like, their Snakes and Arrows album is like this crazy indictment on religion. And just like, oh dang. And why they caused so many of the wars of existence. And it's like, they didn't pull punches. And I think Clockwork Angels was a fitting end, as it turned out to be, because boy, that's like the most Rush album ever. It is literally a steampunk science fiction epic told over the course of an album about a young man off into the world ruled by the clockmaker, the watchmaker, who is a fascist leader who controls everything through control. Everything needs to be done on his time, and his antagonist is the anarchist, who's all about chaos. So like this is going like Get Smart level of chaos and control, like battling it out. And I find it really interesting because like if I were ever to break bad and turn evil, I totally would be that watchmaker, because like I obnoxiously control everything about my life, all the way down to the seconds. Like, and they wrote it into a novel, which was really cool. And I would be the first person to see that if they ever adapt that into a movie someday. But like, you know, Rush is special to me, obviously, if you couldn't tell by listening to this episode. And, you know, most up until like probably when I was like 2021, my favorite band was Lynyrd Skynyrd growing up. And like in college, just like I got bit by the Rush bug, and they've been my favorite ever since. And which is very interesting because Lynyrd Skynyrd's like the complete opposite of Rush, because it's like thematically pretty simple. Just like day to day, average Joe kind of life things. And then you have this stuff that's just like high intellect based. This, it's like, I remember, I'm going to quote Sebastian Bach too. He's just like, what kind of band gets a 14-year-old to be reading Ayn Rand novels?
That's funny. And that's so funny, man, because actually my buddy and I were trying to read that stuff back when we were like 15, 16 too. That's kind of fun. I didn't get very far. I
read Atlas Shrugged my senior year of high school.
I think I read a little bit of that. Yeah.
And so back in high school, when you actually had to sit there and wait for everybody to finish an exam because you weren't just allowed to get up and leave. And I was an avid reader for most of my life. So I'm sitting there reading Atlas Shrugged in my AP politics class, government and politics class. And my pretty liberal teacher, Mr. Burke, walks over and like looks at me sitting there reading Atlas Shrugged, and he's just like, "You believe that kind of stuff?" I'm just like, I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that the funny thing, when I was reading it, I was like, at first I was like, oh, this is gonna be my Bible. This is a whole new way. Cause you know, I was very naive, you know, when I was younger. And so, you know, like most young people. And so I was reading it like, oh, this is this brand new way. And I think a lot of people read it that way. It's a brand new way of looking at the world, you know, it's very
individualism.
Yeah. And I think there's a place for some of that, but I think that's just it. It's a balancing act like everything else. I think you need to read it, you know, through a filter, through the right lens. The same way that socialism needs to be read, you know, through a filter, and people need to, you know, be a little more open-minded to some of the ideas that come from socialism. You know, we've seen a lot of these philosophies turn ugly, you know. So
well, with a critical lens, maybe that's what I'm seeing from Neil Peart that I can't put my finger on. Maybe he's put his critical reading glasses on, and he'll read whatever, and that's what I can't quite finger about him. What were you going to say, Shane?
Yeah. I think what he latched on to most is you can't, like, obviously, like 2112's focusing on, like, you cannot trump and try to suppress the creative of people. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a very individual thing, and people need to have that. You can't take that away from people.
Right.
And from like Atlas Shrugged is more of like, you know, you're on the right path forward when your whole entire philosophy is based off of people's selfishness is going to drive society. And the thing is, it's like, I don't agree people should go out of their way to be selfish. Right. I do see Atlas Shrugged as something more prophetic, because it's like people are just going to do that anyway. And that's just humanity is going to be selfish.
Yeah. The language that she used is a little, I remember it's a little like wait a second now. So I mean, that's definitely, yeah, that's definitely part.
Well, because like it's the groundwork for libertarianism in many ways. But and like I'm a libertarian, but I'm also not an asshole. But like I actually care about other people.
Right, exactly. You could still have individual gains. You can gain wealth, but you can still, care about others, care about the people in your family and your community.
So you're saying, like Tom Sawyer, you can have a moral center and be an individualist and find buried treasure, but you don't have to be a dick.
Exactly. So it's like
that's our show, everybody.
You can benefit others, but also benefit yourselves in the end too. And I feel like there's some kind of balance in the end that you have to find. And I feel like what I appreciate most about what Neil Peart was able to do is like you could tell he was well versed in a lot of different kinds of philosophy and different kinds of things. And the nerd in me thought it was really cool when I listened to the song Rivendell. I'm like, this is based off of Lord of the Rings. But like, there's a lot of deeply philosophical things that Rush tackled in many of their albums, including this one. And I'm a big fan of dystopia and science fiction and stuff like that. And like, I love Red Barchetta, and I think that's a really cool story.
Check out that one again, yeah.
So, in the end, I think Rush is pretty cool, but not in the traditional cool sense, like nerd cool. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate any artist that is able to reinvent themselves and also go against the grain, like they did with 2112. And it sounds like a lot of their albums, I appreciate the ability to do that. I think it's kind of rare in the music industry in general. And, especially to be able to do it at this level, where so many people know who they are. They're probably the biggest, cult band in the world, right? So I appreciate that, so.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate their contributions to making nerdy stuff cool. And on the note of like reinventing yourself, that's what I've been hearing a lot about Kendrick Lamar, who I also listen to less from here and more from here because I'm trying to figure him out. They gave him maybe was it a Pulitzer in literature or something like that. They gave him a huge award a couple years back.
Yeah,
and that's what everybody has to say about Kendrick Lamar. Like he keeps reinventing himself from album to album. Obviously, he's still really young. He's got a few albums to make still, but I'm definitely gonna go. I'll probably go to Vapor Trails after this album because I don't really remember those songs, but a heavier Rush sounds like it would hit me more, more in the heart.
Yeah, Vapor Trails, Snakes and Arrows, and Clockwork Angels is much heavier modern Rush because those were all of their 2000s albums.
Mm-hmm.
Because they only released 3 legit like studio albums in the 2000s if you don't count why can't I remember the name of the album? The one with all the 60 songs on it. I feel like it was Rewind or something like that. But any other thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm just going to go to Permanent Waves next because I like the title. I like the name.
Oh, it's a good one.
Okay, cool.
That's where the Spirit of Radio is from.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Okay. I don't know if I know that one. Yeah. But Permanent Waves. I like that.
And all of you out there, you should go listen to a bunch of Rush. There's 20 albums. Get on it. But Alex and Jim, thank you for both coming on as always.
We try, man.
Thank all of you for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.